Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube page. Today we're going to take a bit of a break from the Class of 99 series, and we're going to talk to a couple of filmmakers who actually were the first ones that I interviewed for the podcast. Back when his film Alienated was coming out on throughout in a few theaters, as well as video on demand, and it's good to have them back. This time we're talking about another film that they made that I happened to see late last year that I really loved, called 2050. And we're going to be joined a little bit later by the director, Princeton Holt, but for now, please join me in welcoming back to the podcast writer and producer Brian Ackley. Brian, thank you very much for joining me today.
Hi, Brian. Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
So, what was the inspiration for 2050?
Okay, that's a great question that I'm not going to be able to answer completely due to my memory. I'm really looking forward to Princeton chiming in and between the two of us, sort of recollecting what transpired in the early stages. But for me, one of the well, I'm sorry, was your question geared toward influences or sort of how the process started?
Sort of how the process started, as far as, I mean, if there were any particular influences and inspirations in terms of what led you to, have this idea that you wanted to write down and make a film on. I mean, we can talk about cinematic influences too.
I guess we'll come back to the influences question. The project started essentially from source material that was created by our team a while back, and we decided to completely rework the concept of it. And many of the elements, the initial elements, came from Princeton himself, and that's that there was going to be an ensemble cast that was intertwined. And there would be romance would be one of the genres, one of the elements to be played with, and because of we'd made a few films together and we'd learned what. Well, here's an important thing: when you're making a film that you expect other people to see, it's a good idea to find out what other people may want to see. And so what that means is that we learned that audiences like science fiction, they like fantasy films, they like horror films. So we decided to tap into that because we wanted to create a film that people would be interested in seeing. So those were the initial elements that the heart of what got us going, and then we played with. So we're coming from science fiction. So the players involved: Princeton, my partner, producing partner Princeton Holt, who directed a couple films, feature films, and also David Vaughn, who was a producing partner of ours on this, and he's also the lead actor. Mm-hmm. The three of us we're the core team behind the development of the story and of the script itself. I would go on, after discussing different things with them, I would go on and write the script down, but I would come back to them and continue and make sure that the pieces made sense, made sure that the story was exciting. So they were an integral part of the creation and development of the script, even if I'm taking the credit for writing it. Okay. And we had to get into more of that too. It was a pretty fun process.
Yeah. What was it what made you sort of land on the particular subject matter, which if you're not familiar with it, 2050 deals with it's a futuristic world in which artificial intelligence, and in particular sex robots, although to a certain extent that feels a bit too generic of a term in this case, are very commonplace, and there's enormous controversy with regards to how significant and how meaningful these, and whether this is something that is good for society or bad for society. And the thing that one of the things that I love about the film so much is that it, and it's not really surprising given the fact that I've seen both yours and Brian's previous work, or sorry, yours and Princeton's previous work. So I mean, I know you guys are very much focused in terms of character character driven storytelling.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
That's the most important thing for you. And so, what was it about that idea that sort of made you land on that idea as far as telling this particular story?
It just ended up making sense for us. So there was a bit of back and forth and research and trying to figure out what we could play with in terms of story. And we knew we wanted something. We wanted to start with something that was exciting, titillating, even. There's something that people would be curious about. And in the news, so we just kind of found that this article popped up in the news, and Princeton will have to let it, remind me if it was David that found it or he found it. But this idea of AI intelligence being used for in place of sex bots, in place of sex dolls, rather. So this whole idea of sex bots, and it's kind of interesting because David and Princeton and I would each come at it at different angles, and we'd be excited about the questions that pop up in different ways, and together that all sort of, or at least most of it, kind of marriages and comes together in the script. But for me, a lot of things that you had talked about in your review of the film are exactly those questions that came to mind, and that those are things that I knew I wanted to explore with this kind of story.
Okay.
And it's also one of the kinds of things when you're talking about sex bots, it just opens up so many questions. And since we are very much focused on character-driven stories, then we're going to want to know how the psychology plays out, given certain characters. So there are just all sorts of possibilities. I think that's what excited us the most.
What would you say was probably the trickiest thing you came up against when it came to writing the story and the screenplay for this movie?
Oh, well, I'll start by saying that this was probably, and it remains today. We made this maybe we wrote this maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago at this point. But this project remains maybe the most the easiest project for me to work on with other people as collaborators go. So it was the easiest script to write. So it was a smooth process with how Princeton and David and I were able to work. But now coming back to challenges, there was a bit of negotiating and well, I should say compromising with the other two to figure out, where a certain character will want to go. How much does this character play into things? How much does that character play into things? So there was that, but we never had any heated conversations. We just sort of worked it through pretty evenly. But I do remember coming toward the end of writing the script and building the tension of not knowing where this story could possibly go. I had drafted a scene that was sort of the opposite scene of one of the earlier scenes when we first meet the first sex bot. It's the scene where the scene in Drew's apartment where we meet Drew for the first time, and his sister comes barging in with her husband. They brought Chinese food, but really she's there kind of spying on him and just being overprotective. So it was a mirror scene to happens toward the end that brings these all these characters together um, in such a way that was rewarding to me. The big question is, what is the answer? We're posing all these questions, like the you have a marriage that's sort of slipping away, and you have an element of another of something else coming in that can help break that marriage up, or it could help bring the marriage together, and figuring out how that can be. I thought I was pretty clever in figuring that out, and in
Mm-hmm.
drafting this particular scene at the and it was very challenging. It was a very difficult scene to write and to work out. But once the pieces made sense to me, it came out very smoothly. But ultimately, it didn't hold up to uh, either Princeton or David's idea of how the film should conclude or how all of these themes should be tied in together. It could have been, I mean, and it could have just been bad writing. Also, it could have been on me to not have been able um, to write exactly what I had in mind, to project
Mm-hmm.
the ideas in mind. I just may not have done a good job of doing that.
When you guys were working on coming up with the story, writing out the story, and basically developing this world, what was how much of it did you have was how much did you when it came to building this world, which is a futuristic world where artificial intelligence is commonplace and it's a significant part of this society, certainly in terms of the movie that you've made. How much back and forth, how much give and take was there in terms of were there things that you guys were coming up with in terms of this futuristic world that you just weren't able to put in, or was it something where you realized that okay, how do we make this as streamlined as possible?
Going in, we knew we were going to be grounded. Now, I had so David, Princeton, and I threw ideas back and forth. What would happen is I would I wrote the outline. I would write pieces of the
Mm-hmm.
outline. I'd write the outline itself and present it to them. And so the outline in different stages. You know, the outline is just 3 acts, and then the outline developed a little bit more, where you have a bit of the character development of the major players in each act, and then an outline that displays essentially all of the scenes with a little bit of information that gives you an idea of the complete story. So there were different stages that we'd move through, and each time they would offer their input, and then we would discuss, and then I would build the next outline, the more in-depth outline based on that. So moving in, I believe Princeton was open in general in terms of writing the story. He didn't want there to be any limitations on me as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
So if I wanted there to be, you know, whatever elements I wanted, if I wanted there to be explosions, this or that, I believe he was open to that from a creative perspective in terms of starting, like getting the first or second drafts out. But then, of course, I put on myself the fact that explosions and certain elements were just kind of unrealistic. So
Right.
so Princeton and David, you know, gave me that permission, as far as I remember. But we all still had the mentality that we were going to be filming this ourselves. We'd be raising our own budget, so we're only going to be talking about, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're not talking about millions of dollars.
Right.
At least, you know, so we went in pretty restricted, and then well, I guess we didn't focus too much on what the outside world would be too much. I mean, for me personally, there were elements of that. I believe Princeton would come to face those challenges more moving into pre-production,
Mm-hmm.
when he got to kind of play with figuring out what it's going to look like and sound like,
Yeah.
and what sci-fi elements may exist in this world. Um, but yeah, so we kept it pretty tight in the script. And I should say I did, because knowing that our budget would be limited, whatever it would be, and knowing also that, I mean, caring more about the characters themselves, and not and the world is more of a metaphor behind
Right.
what's actually happening.
What were some of when it came to writing the script? What were some of the movies that you may have drawn on or were inspired by when it came to writing this story?
Well, one of the major influences we talked about several weeks ago, because you had me on to talk about part of your 1999 podcast series, which is really such a cool thing, but being John Malkovich. And being John Malkovich was a major influence in terms of I guess the style in which the approach I would take, because being John Malkovich, it's sort of a strange world. Odd things happen in this world, but we don't spend a lot of time away from the characters, away from the people. So it's a very intimate setting. Most of the scenes are very intimate in nature. So you don't have you don't have people looking out windows and you're seeing what the everyday sort of world is like. But that became a big influence, and another film was Her. Spike Jonze, I believe.
Yeah, another Spike Jonze film.
In general, okay, so yeah, that's interesting, because I was going to say Charlie Kaufman in general was a big influence, and a lot of times I forget which of Kaufman's scripts are directed by Jonze versus Michael Gondry.
Right.
So I get the two of them mixed up, because I just think what happens, I guess, is the material itself, or the concepts of the scripts are so wild and entertaining that I get drawn in those worlds. But I mean, both directors serve their scripts so well. But yes, so Her was an influence. And for Princeton, I'm trying to when Princeton chimes in, we can talk about Eyes Wide Shut, which I believe was an early influence as well. And I think he's the one that essentially fed that influence into me, even in the writing process. So I'd like to we'll save that for when he's able to chime in.
What about any other? I mean, Her is actually an excellent example, and I'm kind of surprised that I forgot about that when I was writing my own review of the movie, because I absolutely loved Her, and the way it deals with a relationship that a human being has with artificial intelligence. Now, I mean, there it's a very different thing because of the fact that it's just this voice. There's not a physical component in there, but some of the same ideas are very much present, and that's one of the. And so, yeah, it is. I can't believe I completely forgot about Her when I was writing about 2050. What would you what movie, if there's are there any particular movie versions of AI that sort of might have bled into the way you guys were conceiving of the AI in this particular film?
I may not be able to answer that, because it may be influences may have become more subconscious. When I'm writing a project, when I'm writing a story, I'm very much in the world itself, and trying to think of things logically. I am the characters, so I'm just sort of moving along and experiencing things in a very logical and matter of fact sort of way. So there isn't so much. Let me make sure that I pulled this element in or that element. But at the same time, beforehand, there's discussions about different things, the different themes, and you can't help but like her popped up because you can't help but think of similar themes, parallel themes that both films address. But when it comes to the actual writing, I just find it to be. I guess it would be distracting and it would be all these things, but all of that is all even beside the point. It's just I just prefer to experience the story as I'm going through, and I'm very careful with what can happen in the story because it has to make sense. But I'm also driven by the exciting for me and what what would I do in the position if I'm in sort of a sour marriage. It's basically kind of going downhill. I'm bored, and there's a major issue with sex, and there's this opportunity that comes to me where I could essentially design my own companion and fulfill that need. But because it's an inanimate object, because it's something else, the question is whether or not it's cheating. And so to bring up certain questions like this, these are questions I would not be able to just flat out say yes or no or answer.
Yeah.
I would have to think about it. Because I would have to think about it, that goes into the story. So when I'm presenting Michael Green, the main character in the film, with certain challenges when things happen to him, I'm really presenting that to myself. Like, what the hell would I do? What if I accidentally fell in love with something? Even the cheating issue aside, if I accidentally fell in love with this other entity, what do I do next? So that's how I write things. But inevitably, to answer your question, there will be subconscious influences that play up into it. But directly, I wouldn't. So growing up, I don't know if this would classify or not. But growing up, one of my absolute favorite films was Terminator 2. I saw the second one before I saw the first one. I've never been that strong for the first one. The first one is well done. It's very thrilling, very exciting story. The second one for me just blows it out of the water.
Yeah.
And they touch on machines versus humanity. There's some interesting, they really play up with certain ideas in that film. And so maybe that somehow got into my brain as I was developing this and trying to figure out how far can machines come to become human. That I would have to spend more time kind of thinking with those subconscious. Well, one of the films that you brought up in your review was Blade Runner.
Yes.
And Blade Runner is a very, very good film. Well, I first saw Blade Runner in film school, and I wasn't swept away by it. I thought it was an interesting tale. I think I was confused by certain elements of it, particularly the end. I don't think I was mature enough as an observer of film to be able to fully appreciate it, because that wouldn't happen for another 10 years or so.
Right.
But at the same time, I wouldn't call Blade Runner an outright influence of our film, which would sound strange if you watch both of our films, because there are, again, similar themes. But this could very easily have gotten itself into my subconscious and been part of the process without me knowing.
Yeah. Well, when you were talking about like the journey that you as the writer are putting yourself in terms of the psyche of the characters, especially the character Michael, the main character here, when you were talking about that, I couldn't help but think of, and I mean, yeah, we'll talk about it's certainly the visual aspect of the film when Princeton comes in, but yeah, just the whole nature of taking your protagonist on this journey into a world that he's not necessarily adept at navigating, certainly at the beginning, is very much it's very much the structure of Eyes Wide Shut, and Tom Cruise's character. I mean, Bill in that character in that movie, he ends up going on this journey to into a world and into lifestyles that he wants to he's working on his own frustration with what his and his own sense of jealousy at what his wife has just told him, but at the same time, is he going to do something? You know, and there are times where he's very much interested in doing something, but at the same time, there are other times where it's like he doesn't quite realize how much in over his head he is.
Yeah, definitely. And so to come back to two films in particular, well, to continue with the film you're talking about, Eyes Wide Shut, again, I do believe Princeton, this was a major influence for Princeton. It's something that excited him about how this kind of story could be told by taking, it's all visual stuff too, because he takes Michael Green down a set of stairs as well. And there's this whole mystery that is built. That's built as he continues down this path to discover what this parlor is, and all of its wild possibilities.
Yeah.
So for Princeton, and so he made that. I believe he made that clear going in. So that became an outright influence as we move forward with the story and how we tell it. So if Princeton had that, then I had Being John Malkovich as an overt reference that I was very excited to intentionally infuse in the telling, in how we would tell a particular story.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it does actually really make sense that given what I'm doing with regards to 99, we're also talking about two of the most significant
that
films.
is right. That's right. Eyes Wide Shut came out in 1999.
With regards to a movie being made in 2019. And being released in 2019. So, I mean, you have that inspiration of, and especially, it's funny because Being John Malkovich was instantly considered a classic of a lot of people and just a high watermark for cinema at that time when it came to that movie year. Eyes Wide Shut is something where it's like people, there were a lot of people who loved it at the outset, but the thing is, it really didn't grow in appreciation until more people started to watch it and realize, oh, this is what Kubrick was going for. He wasn't just going to make a dirty, softcore porn movie. It's like, of course he wasn't. That's not who Stanley Kubrick was as an artist. But
yeah. Well, and I was the same. I moved into that film the same way, and it may not have been until Princeton's enthusiasm, which would have come, years before we started talking about, 2050, because he's always had an appreciation for the journey that the Tom Cruise character goes through.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting how many things you'll miss. Maybe it's like an immaturity when you're watching a film at a certain age, or at a certain young age. Maybe you just don't. Maybe based on where you are in your life, you're not aligned to get the understand or appreciate the themes that a film is talking about.
Yeah.
But okay, so it's always
Princeton is actually calling in right now, so let me try to get him in
great.
on this. Sorry, just a minute. So I've been talking with Brian Ackley, the credited writer of 2050, and now we're joined by the director of 2050, Princeton Holt. Princeton, thank you for joining us today.
Hi guys, thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to be. It's good to talk to you again. Like this is actually the first time I've talked to you for the podcast in a few years, actually, since we did the Alienated podcast together. So
yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah. So I've been talking to Brian about the sort of some of the inception and the development of 2050, and so when as a director, what was your what were some of your inspirations and some of your ideas when it came to developing 2050?
Well, I'm not sure if Brian probably already, I think he already covered it probably, but we were looking for something sci-fi, fantasy, and that, I guess that prediction about the year 2050 and our interaction with androids was pretty funny and shocking enough for us to get going. So ran it past Brian, talked to David, our co-producer and lead actor. We talked about it, and it sort of that kicked everything off in terms of the concept. We wanted to keep everything more, I guess, about interactions, the relationships, and less about the technology. Brian somehow still found a way to incorporate technology that somehow was able to work into the film. And so I guess I'm just happy to get a little bit of the VFX in it based on what Brian wrote. It seems like when I look back at it, it doesn't feel like a lot, but in the movie, it seems like there's more than what the script had somehow. I don't know if that's the drones that we added or if that's the sequence itself playing itself out when the android was built. But the idea was to keep it simple and keep it low budget.
Yeah, and I one of the things I was really impressed with when I saw the movie for the first time in November was the fact that you guys were able to come up with this credible sci-fi world that still felt very much within the real world, but also it was very simple the way that you established the fact that it's a futuristic world. It's a world that is not necessarily our own, but it's one that also grew out of our own. And that's one of the things I was really impressed with when I was watching it. When it came to doing the visual effects, when it came to doing the visual style of the movie, what were some of the inspirations that you had?
Well, those are, if anybody's been following or saw the movie, I think it's pretty obvious. It's been going around a lot. But Brian can attest to this. What I do before I'm going to direct, before I have to get my head into it, I've got to pick a style. I got to break it down into threes. So based on the material, I ask myself three questions: what it's going to look like in terms of look, right? Am I handheld? Is it colors? Is it muted? Is it colorful? Is it muted? That kind of thing. That's the first thing. Look in terms of color and lighting. What is my look? And then the second thing I ask myself is, well, what's the style? Is it, like I said, are we going to go, is it handheld? Are we on sticks? Is it deliberate? Is the camera moving? Those kinds of things. And then the third is, what does the atmosphere feel like? So is it realistic? Is it stylized, quiet, loud with music, etc.? Those are three different sort of aspects elements that I break it down into. So they never cross into each other. For tone, for the atmosphere, let's start with that. Let's start with look. I was watching a film called Mother of George that won, I believe, a cinematography award at Sundance, or if not Sundance, one of the other festivals. And another film by the same director. Sorry, I can't rattle off the top of my head the name, but it was called not Quiet City. Oh man, I'm drawing a blank. So it's the same filmmaker, so it's the same style. Mother of George was a huge inspiration watching that film, and I was watching it with the DP, and we studied it because of what they were doing with speed, what they were doing with colors, and what they were doing with setup, and very original stuff. Very sort of I want to say nuanced. It was a lot. It was very experimental to us. Like the way they would frame close-ups the opposite way of what they tell you to do in film school. There were so many things that they were doing in that movie. So visually, I definitely wanted to play with that because it was so striking. So that was my choice in terms of colorful lighting, sort of extreme colors. That's what we went for that. For how the camera is going to move, when I knew what the colors were going to look like, I had to decide on how the camera is going to move. I usually go handheld. That's my favorite personal taste. But this time I was like, well, let's because of these characters, we want to keep the camera moving. There's a lot of talking. Let's keep the camera moving. Let's try to. I wanted more than anything else to have life in this movie. Brian and I always make jokes about our past work and its degree of entertainment value. So we always talk about that, and so I wanted to keep the camera moving as much as possible. I knew there was a lot of dialogue, so I wanted to sort of move the camera a lot. That came from camera movement was my boy Scorsese, Paul Thomas Anderson, and those greats. That was what I was looking like. And then atmosphere was very important. Wall to wall music. It was a satire, so I really wanted to keep. We talked about that. It's wall to wall music. That's where the Kubrick came in. Was the atmosphere. Don't take anything too seriously. This is sort of a chaotic, hilarious, crazy world, and so that's the atmosphere. Kubrick was definitely the atmosphere influence.
Yeah, and Brian and I have already touched on, at least in terms of the writing, because from a structural standpoint, the film very much owes a debt to Eyes Wide Shut in the way that Michael Green, the main character, goes into this world of artificial intelligence and sex bots and all of this stuff is very foreign to his own, and he's trying to sort of figure out what he's trying to figure out so much about himself, and the way that Brian wrote the script is very much you can definitely tell the structural influence of Eyes Wide Shut. And then
did Brian?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then the visual standpoint. I mean, the way the colors work, the color scheme, the use of reds, the use of the use of the sort of Christmas colors, even though it's not directly set at Christmas like Kubrick did in Eyes Wide Shut,
right.
Is very much, and the music is very much inspired by Eyes Wide Shut, and that's one of the things that I know really resonated with me watching the film back in November.
That's cool. Thank you. Did Ackley? I'm gonna go by. I'll separate you guys, distinguish you guys by last name, like we did in high school. Did Ackley tell you about how the discussion we had about Eyes Wide Shut? Did you talk about that?
We talked a little bit about it, but I actually need a refresher on at what point Eyes Wide Shut came into play in those early talks when we started discussing, the story more in depth.
Okay, yeah, it wasn't from the beginning. It was we had already started the process, and I guess I want to say if the first draft was not finished, the outline was on its way to being finished. Mm-hmm. And I just happened to revisit it. As you do as a prize fighter, begin working out. You begin, skipping rope and getting your endurance up. My workout is to watch movies, gearing up. When you get gearing up to direct, and I just popped in Eyes Wide Shut again, and I was so taken aback by it. Again, I've seen it so many times, but I just could not believe the audacity that Tom Cruise's character had. And that's what really got to me. He was relentless, and so from a character standpoint, that really was a huge influence because I wouldn't have done 90% of what that guy did in that movie. I wouldn't have reacted the way that he would. So that's what intrigued me, is that this guy would do that. So yeah, we talked about it. I remember telling Brian, I was like, Brian, he's got to let's make it about a place. That's what I remember saying.
Yeah.
I was like, let's make it about a place, and let's try to. I really want to have like an underground place. I'm fascinated by that, and so I think Brian found a way to weave that tale perfectly. I think into the movie.
It was fun. It was so much fun too. I mean, coming to this place with you to discover that I mean, it gives it was such a cool thing to shape. You know, this secret hidden place. Who the hell knows where it is in New York City? You know, but we know there's secret places out there.
Yeah,
So that was wild. That was great.
it was a lot of fun too. And you know what's crazy, Ackley, and Scuttle, I think we found out later that there are underground places like this in the city. And if you do some digging, you find a little bit of everything, underground places. I was in Berlin, and once this woman who works for me told me that when she went to Berlin, she went to some club, and in Berlin, she said, you should check out this place, but I don't think you're brave enough to. She said there's a place that does. She said that there's a place that doesn't at 2:30. It doesn't open until like 2:30 in the morning. And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm out already. I can't stay up that late. I'm old now, man. I can't stay up. But she said there are places where you need some sort of password to get through, and it's not. I wouldn't think it's just like Guys Wide, but you have to get approved to get in, and then it's like a warehouse, and it's some kind of like a rave kind of party. So yeah, I would find out later that these sort of underground communities exist. Brian just really went to town on the creativity of what was inside. I wasn't able to fully bring to life some of the things he wrote. I didn't have the luxury of being able to shoot dialogue. But Brian, and I don't know if the version that you're going to submit to the Academy Awards, Brian, we were invited to include the screenplay in their library. I don't know if you're going to have that published, what you originally wrote versus what I actually shot. But Brian was really descriptive in what was taking place when you first walk into that parlor.
It becomes its own movie in a sense because it's its own world.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to play with that contrast, what does that look and sound like compared to, New York that we, let's say New York of the 80s. Like this is just like no one's walking around having a good time in New York at 10 o'clock at night. It's just such a drab place. So playing with that contrast was a blast.
You know what'd be funny? What'd be funny now that I think about it, and I'm probably nuts enough to do it. I don't know if I have the time. It'd be nice to shoot it the way you wrote it, with the dialogue in it. He has every corner that you turn into in his version of the script. There's activity, there's role playing, there's combinations of humans and androids that would blow the human mind. And he has some wild stuff going on. I just did not. I had to move a lot quicker, and so I couldn't linger on those moments. I couldn't set it up. Plus, the space was that's what drove me crazy. Is I wanted to get I wanted to make it like he wrote it, as much as possible. And so I was kind of crippled by saying, well, I walked into a space. I would see a space. I'm like, well, where's that interaction that he had with the girl slapping the android slapping the man in the suit? And then where's that little interaction where the people are emerging from the side of the room? I just could not find spaces. I couldn't find a space to accommodate every little moment you wrote. So I had to make it more sweeping, and I had to do it without dialogue.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's like, and what you're describing, the idea of what you're describing is, it makes me want to watch that version too. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't. I don't feel like. I feel like the choices that are made in the film as it exists are still very much correct choices, because so much of this I feel like is about atmosphere, and especially if Eyes Wide Shut is such a big influence on the film structurally, as far as visually, I mean that's Kubrick right there. Like he had dialogue in his movies, but he also had images. He also was he was so much more interested in images and the way the images and what dialogue was in there interact.
Yeah. Sure, and also what wasn't seen. So you're right. The way way it came out, it fits the rest of the film. I think so. I appreciate you saying.
Yeah. Plus, it could have been hugely not distracting, but just a takeaway, just moving away from the story itself too much. You could get lost, if we shot it the way I wrote it.
Yeah.
You just completely get lost.
I mean, he didn't have whole sequences play out. He just had these little moments where you would hear stuff. So that would move away from Kubrick and Eyes Wide and more on to 8.5. My influence in film period, Fellini in 8.5. He has sweeping moments, and you have those little words that being said. If you watch those sweeping moments in 8.5, he has these little lines of dialogue that are hilarious. You either hear them off camera or on camera sometimes.
Right.
But it would have been a different movie. So I'm glad that the film got sort of had us make what we had.
And I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's like the film is so. When it came to directing the actors who are playing the androids, what was the approach, and what inspiration did you take from maybe other past performances of android characters and artificial intelligence characters that we've seen?
Great, yeah.
In like Blade Runner, or even if we're continuing with Kubrick a little bit, Jude Law's Gigolo Joe in Eyes Wide in AI.
I did see AI back in the day once, a long time ago, but I didn't reference. Did I reference AI? I think we did speak about it. Yeah, we spoke about it. I didn't have as much influence. I didn't have much to reference for that.
Yeah.
That was a casting. That was a casting thing, and I got to tell you, that's probably the place we got the absolute luckiest. I mean, that was something else. The film cast itself, Stephanie Bloom submitted to us, and it changed our approach to casting. We read a lot of actresses for Sophia. We read a lot of actresses for Quinn. We went through a lot, and Stephanie came through, submitted a self-tape video, and snatched the part right away. And Stormy Maya did the same thing. She submitted. We wouldn't have known to look for a Stormy Maya. We wouldn't have known to look for a Stephanie Bloom. We saw everybody, but they presented not only having the approach of how they perform, because the self-tape and the auditions were spot on. I didn't even need to really direct them in the audition process. That's how good they were. But they also brought look to them and a style. So the casting was I didn't have to do much, because they were already so perfectly, the humans as well, so perfectly there, I thought,
What was
the idea, though, just to further answer your question for the people that want the sci-fi answer, I wasn't going to try to do. I didn't have much reference. I didn't have much to reference. I wasn't going to attempt any kind of robotic voices or anything like that. We were going to just sort of, they had slight differences in how they were programmed and their programming, and that's what we went with. And so some people are a little bit more fluid than others. The Sophia characters, I think, has been with Michael, has sort of adapted. He must have customized her very, very detailed in a detailed manner as that sequence that gets a lot of laughs of him choosing the different aspects and elements that his android.
Articulation, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Intellect, yeah.
And they have these things now where they can really feed off you better. So Stephanie's performance was perfect for that, and her choice was, and we discussed, was to really make it uncanny of the similarities between the humans. And I would say Quinn, played by Stormy Maya, her choice was a little bit sort of less customized, more that you. But she's the middle, and then I would say Cameron character, who we don't see a ton of, but Cameron is the male android. That choice was, I mean, he's fresh. He's almost fresh out the box. He doesn't bleed.
This woman doesn't want to talk much at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, the performances in the movie are really good and really good. And I mean, as the film has hit festivals, I mean, a lot of the performers have been justly rewarded for their efforts.
Yes, makes me happy. That's my proudest. That's the proudest thing. I'm proudest part of the element of the movie that I'm the proudest of the performances and how they've been received. So thanks for that.
Yeah. And one of the things that's so great about this film, and I think it's especially important when you're dealing with speculative fiction, regardless of whether it's true sci-fi or not. But I think one of the most important things about speculative fiction is that you present the ideas, but you don't necessarily present a vantage point as to how you feel about those ideas. You're not telling the audience this is how I feel about. You're just presenting the audience with these ideas, and you hope that they will make up their own mind for themselves as to how they feel about those ideas. And I think that's one of the strongest things about the film.
Well, Brian, I appreciate that. That's something that you, as a real cinebuff, appreciate. That's something Brian and myself really appreciate. And that's something that from our experience and the sales and the territories that it's going for overseas and their reaction to it, other distributors, other buyers internationally, they seem to appreciate that. But American audiences don't typically appreciate that at all.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, American audience are more comfortable with knowing how they're supposed to feel, which is kind of a weird thing.
I got that question over and over again, and it frustrated me at the film festival Q&As. I hate that question. What do you want us to feel from it? That's crazy. What do you want me to feel? Oh, my God. Like, what do you want us to take from it? Because we want it to be told something. It's like, what do you feel? Yeah. And subsequently, a lot of them felt like it was like after seeing it, they wanted one. So I didn't expect that. I thought we were sort of making more of a, an absurd warning or some sort. Hey, this thing could get really weird, but maybe the way those scenes were at the end were written made them, and maybe it made sense to them why one would want to own one of these things.
Well, and I think that, and I think it goes to American audiences are so used to being told how to sort of feel about issues like this,
right?
Especially if it's something more ambiguous, that they don't really know how to feel and they don't really appreciate it. I mean, you can see that.
Look at us.
You can see that in Kubrick's work. I mean, we were talking earlier about Eyes Wide Shut, even which one of the things Brian was mentioning as an influence being John Malkovich. And, I made the point where it's like, it's really interesting that, like, we're talking about a movie in 2019 where you've got two films from 1999, and keeping with the Class of 1999 series that I'm working on, where these two significant films from that year are bleeding over in being in inspiring movies now.
Yes. And the camera, Magnolia was that was 99?
Yep.
Who got Magnolia, by the way?
I'm sorry?
Who got Magnolia?
Brian got another filmmaker friend of mine. But
that guy.
Yeah.
Oh, devastating. That's like, but no. Eyes Wide is perfect for me and being John Malkovich as well. I love those movies. Malkovich was a huge influence. But yeah, those films from '99 were special. Those are some special movies.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, what a great year that was. But yeah, I don't think that in terms of telling people how to feel, I asked Brian and David this question hypothetically, and I'll ask you, Scuttle, what do you think would be the reaction today if a Clockwork Orange came out today?
All I can
in America.
Well, first of all, if it came out today in America, I think it would I think you would have a lot of people wanting it banned, like it was in the United Kingdom for so long. Um,
Right.
the fact of the matter is, it's like I feel like if you want to, I feel like it would almost be misunderstood, like Fight Club was. Talking again about 1999 film, but I mean the nihilism in Clockwork Orange, and I think I don't know if a filmmaker like Kubrick could work in Hollywood today. I really don't know they would, because it's so drastically different. I mean, it's like the fact that Terrence Malick has been able to have this sort of career after, like, Tree of Life, where it's like he's been able to make film after film after film, is kind of astonishing to me, because of the fact that it's like Terrence Malick, in very much like Kubrick, is an acquired taste, and it's like he's somebody who really challenges people, and he doesn't make films that are easy to digest. I think it would be very difficult for Kubrick to get a film made nowadays.
And I'd ask another question, a follow-up question. I asked Brian as well. What's the last satire you saw released in America? What's the last American satire that we've seen? I can't think of off the top of my head. The last one I can think of is "Thank You for Smoking."
I feel like there's one since then, but I cannot remember for the life of me. I feel like there's been one, at least one since then. But I feel like there's been something since then. But yeah, it's tough to yeah, I mean, it's the fact of the matter is, it's like studios just, even the indies, they don't necessarily want to make those movies anymore, and it's a damn shame. Right.
Let me ask you guys, do you think American audiences don't like to think that we just prefer to be just entertained? Is there like just a lack of curiosity or self-reflection?
I think they like to. I do think they like to think up to a point. I do think they like to think about movies up to a point. I mean, you look at Christopher Nolan. I mean, his movies. He makes these gigantic movies where not necessarily everything is spelled out in black and white, but people still flock to them. People still it still resonates with people, and so I think to a certain extent, it entirely depends on the person who's telling the story. I think if you're telling it in a way that is very much within genre, within modern sort of escapist conventions, I think you can get away with a lot more thought than if it's something a bit more bolder. If it's a bit bolder and not as easily digestible on the first viewing.
I think I like both of those reasons that you guys give. My question would be perhaps there's a mixture of the both. I don't think it's as negative, or not negative, but I don't think that I would judge it as the American audiences don't like to think. I think that they don't like, that they prefer to think about other things. Like they prefer to work things. If they're going to think and get involved, it seems like they prefer sort of to figure out what happened, right? They like the mystery of it.
Yeah.
I like to solve. You ever notice that how people, they love to watch those thrillers and Gone Girl and films that you have to put together and I knew it was her, they like that kind of thinking in a genre, in a, they at the end it's solved though. They don't want to be like, hey, go home. Maybe it was the girl. Well, maybe it was the mom. Hey, I feel very comfortable not knowing who it is. No. They want to work to figure it out, but then they want to be confirmed that they're right. So there's that kind of, that kind of thinking. But in terms of a satire, we don't see a lot of those at all because they're not definite. They're not exact in saying, hey, we're going to tell you what to think about this, besides adding some music and showing how absurd the filmmaker thinks the world that they created is. After that, the audience, the American audience, might feel left out of the fun.
Yeah.
Well, now we're so overprotected. I don't think, like you're saying, I don't think, like Brian, you're saying, I don't think, or I forget who's saying what, but what is it? The Kubrick film you mentioned, it wouldn't, it'd be banned.
Clockwork Orange, yeah.
Clockwork, yeah, of course. Yeah. So I'm going to write myself a note to look into satires. Let's see what.
Yeah.
Let's see where the hell they are, how well they're doing.
Hey Scuttle, do you remember Bulworth?
Yeah. I saw it in theaters.
All right.
It's fantastic.
Now
I have it on DVD.
This guy's rapping a rapping politician who says Trump shit. Well, he's saying, but he's from a liberal standpoint. He's saying shocking things that you never hear a politician say. And Holly Berry is like running around with him in his limo while he's. And I don't remember there being a very strong positive reaction from American audience to that.
No. Well, right? And the thing is, it's like that was. Well, and the thing is, it's like that is a very interesting time, and like, if you think about the time where that and Primary Colors and Wag the Dog, because all of those came out within like a 5-6 month period, like that was right around the time of the Lewinsky thing. And so that was right around the time of that. So it's like, it's fascinating to see the way those audiences just kind of bounced off of those. And I think part of it is, and to go back to nowadays as far as satire, I think to a certain extent it's kind of difficult to do satire right now because it feels like so much of things happening in the real world is so absurd that it almost makes satire obsolete. Like how many times have you read an article, like a title of an Onion article, and thought that's very much real life?
That's a real thing.
Yeah.
And then these days, as you can see socially and politically, there's no gray area. Everybody's only thinking.
It's all black and white.
Yep. And so there's no gray area. There's no room for nuance. If you think this, then you must be a that. If there's some extreme, if you disagree with the narrative, then you must be a Nazi. Or if you disagree with this, then you're a bleeding snowflake.
Yeah.
Or snowpuff or whatever the terms are. It's always an extreme. It's always like you said, it's got a black and white. It's never any gray area, and I think satires exist in the gray area.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of the more that's one of the things that's so enriching about a movie like 2050 is that it really it brings up ideas that it brings up ideas that Brian, I see you and I see the 2050 movie page present, offering up articles all the time about advances in artificial intelligence, advances in terms of sex robots in the real world. This stuff is happening in the real world, and it's fascinating to, and that's one of the things that is so great about this film from a thematical standpoint is that it's very much even though it's set in 2050, which feels far away, in reality it really isn't. And and the fact that you've got these ideas that are going, and the fact that there's a film out there that I think is exceptional. I thought was a fantastic film when I saw it.
Thank you so much, man.
Deals with ideas that AI can bring up in people in a way that is intelligent and thought-provoking, but also entertaining. This is a very entertaining movie. I mean,
thank God.
Yeah, it is. And the thing is, I don't really, I don't look at it as satire, but actually, the more I think I didn't look at it as satire when I first saw it, but the more we're talking about it, the more I think about it. It's like, yeah, it is satirical.
Wall to wall circus music sometimes. Wall to wall. I don't know if we were marketing it as satire. I think we were. I know I wanted to stay away from satire. I remember early on we talked about staying away from I definitely. I think we might have had an interaction on Twitter, Scuttle, about me saying, "Hey, I'm not marketing this thing as sci-fi at all." Me and Brian learned our lesson before, so we're not going to do that. The sci-fi fans will come for your head.
Yeah.
And this is not for the Ex Machina fan, and I know that marketing doesn't like me to do. Not doesn't like me, but the marketing consultant that we work with. They didn't like my answers because they were a little bit too honest and too straightforward for marketing purposes. But I'll say it now. If you like Ex Machina, there's a great chance you're not going to like this. So if you're looking for Ex Machina in 2050, just stay away. I'm not giving you that. If we don't have Ex Machina. Ex Machina for not only just budgetary reasons, I would say more so for for the approach. The approach in Ex Machina was what were they questioning? They weren't questioning the real. They weren't really questioning this technology's effect on relationships as a whole. They looked at it with the they only focused on a few characters.
Yeah.
They were really focused on the technology itself, right? Really exploring that technology in a very expository, explanatory way, right? Mm-hmm. And then they were questioning the threat, the physical threat of that technology, which is cause and effect, and that had to conclude with the death. Like that's the extreme. Those are questions answered. What are we doing? What is this technology doing? How far can it go? Oh my God! And what could be? Oh damn! A guy's dead. People are dead.
Mm-hmm.
So that's there. I mean, that's very concrete and conclusive. We're not going to compete with that. We're not going to even go there. We're going to just discuss the effect that it has on our relationships.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important parts about it is that it's focused on a very basic human need for connection. And
right.
and questioning, well, what does that look like within the context of having artificial intelligence that we can basically tailor make for ourselves?
Right.
And that's one of the things that's so wonderful about this film is that's a discussion that's worth having, and it's not just for, it's like we've thrown around the term sex robots a lot in this discussion, but the fact of the matter is, it's like that's not necessarily just their purpose for the characters in this movie.
Right.
It may be the main purpose in some cases, but it's not the only one.
Right. Right. I agree. It's we were really focused on the questions that Ex Machina we're not interested in. We were interested in what is it going to be like when your ex is with an android. What is it going to be like when you're is it cheating? Like that's something nobody talked about. Is it considered cheating? We've had sex toys in the world for years. Is that considered cheating if you're in a relationship? Because this could essentially be a sex toy that just has a body to it, an
mm-hmm.
artificial body to it. So we were interested in asking those questions, and that's sort of what we were interested in.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of the and it's a movie that I think is comparable quite favorably to other movies like Ex Machina, like AI, like Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049 in how they deal with artificial intelligence and the question.
I never saw Blade Runner, the first one. I never saw the second. I never saw 2049 either.
Oh, really?
We were making. Yeah. I still haven't seen it. And I maybe I purposely stayed away so I wouldn't feel any kind of comparison to it. I wouldn't feel any pressure to do anything close to what they were doing. To this day I don't know what they were doing with it. And I did not, and I stayed away from revisiting Ex Machina. I think I took a look at one of the interactions between the android and the machine and the guy. I took one look at the interaction, but that wasn't for me. I showed that to one of the actors because I can't remember if it was Stephanie or if it was Stormy. I remember showing that scene to them as an example of why they don't have to play it robotic.
Right.
Or as an example, I'm like, hey, here's an example. How far to the left or to the right do we want to go from this kind of tone? So that answered your question earlier. That I just thought of that. I did take a clip of Ex Machina and show that clip just to a couple of the actors as a starting point of I didn't want them to feel any pressure on how they had to behave.
Yeah.
I think so that was something that I remember showing them, but I didn't study it for myself at all. I tried to stay away from any influences, and maybe that helps because if we're anything on this, hopefully we're original. And I mean, I am hearing that, and that's tough to do these days. So
yes,
if we have originality, oh my goodness, I'm thrilled. So I'll take that.
Yeah. Well, we lost Brian here. Let me see if I can get him back in here. Just a minute.
No problem.
Well, what is next for the film as it's gone through theaters? I know it's gone through theaters. It's gone through film festivals. What's next for it?
We're still actually in theatrical. We're doing is Brian on voice only? Oh, there he is. You're still in there. I didn't see you, so I was just. So we are still in limited theatrical. You're going to see us pop up a bunch of different places. Brian, I'm hearing that there's a shot at Atlanta as you requested. So fingers crossed. This is a rollout similar to another sort of sci-fi-ish low budget movie. Coherence, which you've seen, I'm sure.
I'm trying to remember if I don't know that I've never.
You sir will love Coherence. Coherence has like almost a 99% score or something crazy like that on I think with fans and critics.
Okay.
It's like universally, like it's almost universally loved or unanimously loved, but. It's a low-budget movie that was about a comet appearing over a house, and then there was like a couple of different dimensions that came from it. But we were a fan of that rollout. We actually saw that little movie in theaters. I saw it in New York, and it was on one screen here in New York. And David, I told David, I said, hey, man, this thing is going to be out of theaters tomorrow. Can you go see it in L.A. at the same time? And he did. This was years ago. It came out in 2014.
Okay.
We made it after we finished. We made it after we finished shooting Alienated, and after we made Alienated, Alienated was in post. We wanted to see how far a little sci-fi movie could actually go, and we had heard about it, so we followed it. I wanted to see what movie got in these screens, and I think they did about 7 cities. I want to say, and so we patterned the release strategy like they did. What they did is they opened theatrically, so you can only see it in one theater in LA. Then another theater in the Bay Area, then another theater, and it sort of traveled like that. And then toward the end, they increased their number of cities slightly as their video on demand was going to come out. So we're not making a video on demand announcement yet, but we're going to remain in select theaters across the country, popping up. We just popped up in Brooklyn, had a nice screening there.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of doing like a pop-up thing as we continue to roll it out, and then people should be able to get it video on demand later summer, early fall.
Okay. Yeah, and I will obviously I will obviously promote the Living Daylights out in Atlanta release if it does come to Atlanta, because I want to see it again on the big screen, because I think just from a visual standpoint I'm fascinated to see it on the big screen, but I also kind of want to see it with an audience, and I want to see how the reaction is. So yes, I do hope to see it on the big screen here in Atlanta.
Yeah, it's fun to watch stuff with an audience it's fun to watch stuff with an audience and see stuff that makes that people laugh at that you don't expect.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we shot the movie in 235, which was to be experienced, but in the theater, on a big screen. And then also to finish that point, Brian, there have been some changes that I would love for you to see. We've made some updates.
Okay.
So I would love for you to see. You probably saw an early festival version. I think it's pretty different.
Okay.
Not in terms of not majorly different, but there are little nuances that are different, like opening sequences that are different, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'd be interested for you to see the latest version. So we're gonna, I made sure that as we spoke to the theaters and we worked with distribution, that we included Atlanta on that list, and I had you in mind for that. So thank you, man.
Excellent. So we were talking about the cast earlier. We didn't actually mention the biggest name in the cast, and that's Dean Cain.
Oh yeah.
He actually plays the proprietor of where people are getting some people are getting their sex robots from. How did you get him involved in the project?
How the hell did you guys get Dean Cain in your movie? Dean was we through a mutual friend who had worked with him. A friend of mine, Joel Regan, had knew him, and I reached out to Joel. I didn't know Joel from the hole in the wall, but I knew he'd worked with Dean, and I somehow reached out to him, and he and I became friends, and we're talking about other projects. And then we ended up. I don't think I reached out to him about Dean Cain at all. That wasn't what I was reaching him about. We were talking about other stuff and distribution things, and then it just so happens that I reached out to him about Dean, and before you know it, he said, "Well, I can make the connection and send in the script." And we sent in the script, and he if the offer, he said if the script worked for him, he would do it. And we showed him some early raw footage in the movie. We didn't have anything to show him but raw footage. And the script, and he was excited. He loved it, and he signed right up to do the movie. And we paid him, and he showed up, and he killed it. He on set, people might be surprised that he was making fun of us later in an interview about how many pages that we gave him of dialogue that Brian wrote. But what was so incredible is that he just didn't want to say a word. I mean, he didn't want to change a word. When you're dealing with the biggest star I'd ever directed, that we'd ever worked with. Period. I think as a this group, and it was funny. I was making sure I didn't get in the way, and he was like, "Ooh," he would stumble on a couple of lines as he was trying to learn this monologue. And I said, "Hey, you can make it your own. Me and Brian aren't going to be mad at you if there's too many words here, or you want to take this paragraph out here." And he was like, no, absolutely not. He goes, "I don't want to change a word of this." So I'm very proud to say that he wrote every word that comes out of Dean's mouth. Brian wrote, and I think there's one line that he even improv, but he added a line or two at the end where he closed the scene out. So we were incredibly fortunate to have him. And he continues to be an advocate for us. He popped up on TV shows to promote it. I don't know if you saw. He was on Fox and Friends promoting it a bunch of times. He was on Today's Show promoting it. And we're just incredibly fortunate to not only have him in this movie, but to know him.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys think?
Too. I'm very happy with Dean's performance.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys have coming up next?
Well, Brian, you can answer that. I'm not really on the production side anymore. But actually,
I shot a very small feature in Florida, which has taken me about 2 years to put together because it's micro budget, which is the kind word of saying no budget. How to it. And wildly fun film to make, but it's completely outside of the Hollywood system. So it's I don't expect it. I expect my audience to be maybe 2% of a mainstream audience. So it's like this is sort of this is kind of an invitation only type of thing to watch. Okay. It's called Do Us Part. It's a psychological horror thriller, supernatural, experimental, wall-to-wall music, So I'm kind of playing with all kinds of fun elements. It's a complete art house film.
Okay. And yeah,
What made-
Princeton. I
what
kind of
made
knew.
you-
I kind of knew when I was asking that question because you have said that this is your last feature.
Oh no, I didn't say. I'm not saying that anymore. I really
Okay.
regret. Dean got mad at me. Dean got mad at me. I'm just saying that right now. Like I don't have anything on the horizon.
Okay.
Is that okay? I'm
Yes,
not.
that's fine. I mean, honestly, even if it does end up being your last feature, that's fine because it's a heck of a way to go out. But I certainly hope it isn't because of the fact that it's funny. This is actually like it was 10 years ago, Princeton, that you reached out and sent me your guys' work as far as Cookies and Cream in Uptown. And so that's how I got to know you for the first time and talk to you for the first time and talk to you about your movies. So it's really it's so much, it's so fitting on so many levels that like 10 years later here we are, we're talking about your recent film and your recent films together. And one of the things that I love about it is that you guys have stayed very much the same in terms of what's important to you guys as far as filmmaker, as far as stories to tell as filmmakers, but also to see how much you guys have grown as well.
Oh man, that's awesome, man! Thank you so much. There's been a lot of changes. I think we have evolved naturally, but one of the coolest things is that the nucleus is the same. Mm-hmm. Brian and I have been working together since 07, 06, I think. Maybe even earlier, and it's just so much fun to work with Brian. And I will tell you this: if there's anybody going to quote unquote get me back in the chair or on a production, it's going to be Brian Ackley. That's the only one. Brian is,
and I like a good challenge. So.
and he knows what I like, and we like the same stuff. We're fascinated by conspiracy theories, and if the belief that if we don't believe the theory, that makes us even more excited about it. So we're like, there's no way this conspiracy theory is real, so that means that it's to make a great story,
And there's endless material out there. Endless.
Yeah, and I gotta say, Scuttle, Ackley's a lot of fun to work with. It's always very easy, and when it's that easy to work with somebody and that fun, it's not a pain. So I wouldn't see it as anything painful because he's involved, as long as he and I, been working together. So that's been the cool part, and to still be here talking about movies with him when we first talked about Cookies and Cream all those years ago is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I had already mentioned in Princeton that this script was maybe the easiest film I've ever written in collaboration with other partners. Which I shared that sentiment with you before, but our process of writing was just so smooth. But anyway, so yeah, the feelings are all mutual.
Yeah. So where is so you mentioned it's currently going around theatrically. I know it did have a screen recently here in New York. Recently in New York this past weekend. Where's the next place that's going to be playing at?
I can't confirm. I'm looking at there's a Midwest. There's a Midwest possibility coming up really soon. There is and then like I said, Atlanta. We're going to expect it in those cities. I mean, I can't confirm yet, so I can't give you any confirmation. Right. But if there's anything I can give is I can say expect it to the next cities to be cities that we haven't already played. Now, I know that leaves like 45, only 44 more states to go, guys. But we're not going to do a lot of repeats, so you won't see us. I don't think you'll see us in the Los Angeles area because we did 2 weeks out there. We have the great little run out there. We've already hit New York City. So those no Nashville probably and no Baltimore or no Maryland, but places like we're looking at South Florida. We're getting here's a better answer. We're going to where we're being requested. So that's a great answer. That's a much better answer to your question. Is these are the places that there's demand. Philly is number one by far. Long Island is number two. There's Milwaukee. There's Atlanta. There's some Orlandos we're seeing. There's Michigan. There's Houston. There is Chicago. That's a little bit of our Midwest, and there's Michigan. So those are 8 cities I'm telling you right now that we got our eye on, and that's the fans demanding it, and those are the ones that we get the most requests for. So we're probably going to be, I guess it's the first time I've revealed which cities are in the lead for bringing it to your city. We have a Demand It feature, guys, for anybody that is interested that's listening to this. There's a Demand It in your city feature that we have that we sort of got from Paranormal Activity and other similar release strategies. And Philly, those cities that I named are the ones in the lead. So those are the ones that we have our eye on first.
Yes, I was about to say, where can people go to demand it in their city?
They can go to 2050movie.com, and they'll be able to. You click, go over to the watch section, and under the watch section, it'll tell you where it's playing currently, and you'll be able to demand it in that city. And we're going to keep that in mind. Those other cities are in the lead, but that doesn't mean that they can't be taken over by another city, or doesn't mean that we can't just add the new demanded cities or city to the list.
All right.
And some of us might be there in certain releases, certain cities, and you're probably going to find somebody from the cast and crew there to either introduce the film or do a Q&A afterwards.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, most of the time we have had a representative of the film, a cast or crew member at these screenings.
Yeah.
So chances are we'll be able to continue that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, yeah, definitely. And if whoever if it does end up in Atlanta, you definitely know where to get in contact with me, and I would definitely love to I'll definitely promote the living daylights out of it. And because the fact of the matter is, it's a wonderful film, and it's a movie that is it gets to. I think even though you guys aren't necessarily promoting it as sci-fi per se, because of you don't want people to have these sort of outsized expectations of what to expect with it. It is. I think it accomplishes what the best sci-fi can do, which is it's speculative fiction, telling us about reflecting something about our current world within a world that isn't necessarily ours yet. And I think that's one of the things that great sci-fi does, and I definitely think 2050 is a part of that.
That's a good way to put it, Brian. Yeah, thank you. That's a very good way to put it. I mean, especially as technology is concerned, and the technology's influence on us and our use as a tool. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me today. It was a lot of fun to talk to you. We got over the technical, bumps and fits and spurts, but I feel like this was a really great conversation about a movie that I know means a lot to you guys, and certainly means a lot to me as a movie watcher. And I definitely hope that as it goes into more theater, more cinemas, as it hits video on demand, I do hope that people check it out and take a look at it, and think about it. Think about what it's trying to say, or what it's not trying to say, and sort of what it's presenting as a way of getting to a conversation.
Right.
We appreciate.
We really appreciate your support. It's been very, very appreciated and flattering. And your writing on the film, that's easily my favorite review, not just because it's positive. I've had, Brian and I will tell you, we've had some favorites that were negative. So, and they're on our favorite list. But yours just had the details, and you caught the references, and I really appreciate it, and the rest of the cast and crew does as well.
I'd like to thank Brian and Princeton for joining me today. Brian has been on a lot with the class of '99. He's got at least one more in that one. We're going to do Princeton. I'm looking forward to finally getting to the films that we're going to talk about on that. But I really wanted to get them to talk about 2050 because it's a movie. It's honestly going to be one of the best films I've seen this decade. That's how much it meant to me watching it, and I'm really excited to see what updates and see what changes Princeton may have made since I watched in November. And like they said, you can go to 2050movie.com, demand it in your city, be on the lookout for video on demand, and so that's going to be really exciting. I'm really appreciative for both of those people too for their time. Coming up, we have some more of the class of '99 coming up. Three of the biggest movies of 1999 in terms of reputation as well as the themes that they present. Really looking to that, as well as a rare, almost it's almost an immediate sort of film review that our resident kaiju expert and I will be discussing the recent Godzilla King of the Monsters, and so be on the lookout for that one as well. Also be on the lookout for filmmaker interviews. There are a couple that I'm hoping to get to throughout the summer as I've been screening more releases for release. There's one coming up this coming week on a new documentary about the Woodstock Music Festival. For now, this is Brian Scuttle. Thank you very much for joining me, and join me at the Sonic Cinema Patreon and subscribe, and you'll get stuff like discussions on the chapters of my upcoming book, Why is the Rabbit Wearing Sunglasses? And I took a different angle as far as doing that this past couple weeks with a very special audio commentary, and you can only hear that at patreon.com/SonicCinema. For now, this is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com.